Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. It's been a long day, and I so appreciate everyone who still has the power to not only attend these sessions, but to also present. So thank you to everybody who's in this room. I wanted to start off with a land acknowledgement, and I am from the West Coast, and I am endeavoring to give justice and pronounce the words from the folks out here, the Indigenous communities out here. So please bear with me. If you hear me say it wrong, please come after to correct me, but I believe I'm close to having it correct. So I wanted to acknowledge that we are on WGH5, also known as Montreal, situated on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst many First Nations, including the Kanien'kehá:ka of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, Huron-Wendat, Abenaki, and Anishinaabeg. We recognize and respect the Kanien'kehá:ka as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters on which we meet. Today is also home of many Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Thank you and welcome for joining us at WGH5, Invisible No More, Centering Mothers, Girls, and Gender Diverse Voices. My name is Stefania, and I'm the Executive Director of Public Affairs and Advocacy at the Women's National Housing and Homelessness Network. The Women and Gender Homelessness stream is curated by our network as we have been partnering with the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness for some years. So thank you truly for everyone who's come to attend today, and thank you so much to our presenters. We're going to present one after the other and hold all questions for the end. So thank you so much for your patience. And to our first presenters, thank you so much.
Bonjour. Est-ce que vous avez aimé votre journée jusqu'à maintenant? Oui, donc j'espère qu'on va vous donner encore des choses à mijoter. Alors, je suis Sally Richmond, je suis la directrice générale de WGH5 et je suis ici aujourd'hui avec ma collègue Jessica Bouchard, qui est une de nos coordinatrices cliniques. Et aujourd'hui, le thème de notre présentation est l'itinérance et la maternité. Donc, sur la diapositive, vous pouvez voir à gauche les images de l'itinérance. C'est souvent des images sombres, souvent une présence masculine, des personnes seules, les personnes exposées à l'extérieur. Et de l'autre côté, on a les images de la maternité. C'est souvent des images avec de la douceur, la proximité à l'intérieur, l'image féminin. Donc, c'est deux concepts qui sont dans l'imagination collective assez séparés. Mais à WGH5, à chaque jour, on voit qu'est-ce qui se passe quand on rencontre quelqu'un qui vit l'itinérance pendant qu'elle a un ou plusieurs enfants à charge. Donc, voici le plan de la présentation. Pour débuter, on va parler un peu de qui est WGH5, qu'est-ce qu'on fait à Montréal. On va vous parler un peu des trajectoires des mamans avec qui on travaille. On va vous partager nos observations et nos apprentissages en maison d'hébergement en travaillant avec les femmes avec enfants. Et on va vous offrir quelques réflexions pour finir. Qui est WGH5? WGH5, à l'origine, c'était une maison d'hébergement qui a été fondée en 1988. C'était conçu pour les femmes seules sans enfants, mais peu de temps après l'ouverture de la maison d'hébergement, une femme est arrivée avec son enfant et d'autres par la suite. Et donc, au cours des années, on a dû adapter nos services pour répondre aux besoins des femmes avec enfants. Aujourd'hui, WGH5 a deux maisons d'hébergement, une pour femmes avec enfants, c'est de cette maison d'hébergement qu'on va vous parler aujourd'hui, et l'autre pour femmes seules et avec enfants. Nous avons des appartements de transition, des appartements permanents, on a des services de prévention, des services post-hébergement et des programmes pour soutenir les femmes. Et tous ces services sont adaptés pour les mamans avec leurs enfants. Aujourd'hui, vous êtes à Montréal. Je sais que certains d'entre vous sont à Montréal tout le temps. Donc, Montréal, c'est une grande ville avec une population d'environ 1,8 million de personnes. À Montréal, il y a plus de 30 maisons d'hébergement pour femmes. Donc, dans les maisons d'hébergement pour femmes, on a des maisons qui sont spécialisées en violence conjugale. Et c'est là où c'est des maisons qui reçoivent des femmes dans le contexte d'une crise où la femme, elle fuit un conjoint violent. Et souvent, la femme, elle peut rester plusieurs mois avant de devoir quitter. On a aussi des maisons d'hébergement qui sont plus spécialisées en itinérance et on a des maisons d'hébergement qui sont appelées multiproblématiques où on voit des femmes qui vivent l'itinérance pour toutes sortes de raisons, y compris la violence conjugale. Et donc, à LGH5, on a une population très mixte des femmes qui sont en situation d'itinérance pour diverses raisons. À Montréal aussi, on a eu plusieurs dénombrements. Dans les dénombrements, on voit très peu de femmes avec enfants, sauf dans les maisons d'hébergement de violence conjugale. Mais à LGH5, on croit que ces chiffres sous-représentent le problème parce qu'en fait, on voit de plus en plus de femmes qui arrivent dans nos services avec des enfants. Et pourquoi elles ne sont pas dans les dénombrements? C'est parce qu'elles font tout pour cacher leur itinérance. Elles ne veulent pas risquer de perdre l'autre enfant. Elle veut créer un sentiment de sécurité pour elles, donc elles vont tout faire pour cacher leur situation, donc elles ne sont pas visibles. Aujourd'hui, on va vous parler de la Lumineuse. Donc, c'est une maison d'hébergement que LGH5 a ouverte en 2021 pour répondre aux besoins croissants de femmes en situation d'itinérance avec enfants. À la Lumineuse, nous avons une capacité d'accueil de 7 familles. Le séjour maximum, c'est 12 mois. Il y a une présence d'intervenantes 24 heures par jour pour 7 jours de la semaine. La nourriture est fournie. Donc, il y a des repas que nous, on cuisine avec une cuisinière et aussi on donne accès à la cuisine aux femmes pour qu'elles puissent cuisiner certains repas elles-mêmes. Il y a une contribution mensuelle, donc c'est $400 par mois plus $50 par enfant. Ça, c'est parce que le séjour maximum, c'est 12 mois. Donc, il faut que la femme, elle garde cette habitude de payer, d'avoir dans son budget un montant pour son loyer, un montant pour son alimentation, mais tout est compris dans ce budget-là. Donc, avec ça, elle a son hébergement, elle a sa nourriture, elle a accès à une buanderie, elle a son Wi-Fi et évidemment, elle est suivie par les intervenantes. Les chambres sont partagées et on a des chambres supplémentaires pour les adolescents et les grandes familles. Donc, les chambres sont partagées, la maman avec son enfant. Qui vient à LGH5? J'avais des notes, mais là, j'ai fait plusieurs pages sans les regarder, donc j'ai aucune idée où je suis, quelque part ici. Donc, à LGH5, on a reçu à la Lumineuse les mamans, je pense une 50aine de mamans depuis l'ouverture des services. Les mères sont âgées entre 21 et 56 ans, mais 50% d'entre elles ont entre 30 et 42 ans avec un âge médian de 38 ans. Souvent, quand on pense aux femmes monoparentales en difficulté, il y a beaucoup plus de services qui ciblent les jeunes mamans. Mais à LGH5, on a vraiment vu ce besoin d'offrir un soutien pour les mamans un peu plus âgées. Les enfants qu'on a reçus ont été âgés de 0 à 22 ans. Donc, on a vu un peu tous les âges. Les enfants plus âgés à charge, parfois, c'était un enfant qui avait des frères ou des sœurs plus jeunes et l'enfant était toujours avec son maman, donc l'enfant majeur, on parle de ça. Ou parfois, c'était un enfant avec une difficulté particulière qui faisait en sorte que l'enfant ne pouvait pas être autonome. Donc, par exemple, un enfant sur le spectre de l'autisme qui n'était pas autonome dans ses démarches quotidiennes et devait rester avec sa maman. Donc, il y a vraiment un besoin pour ces maisons d'hébergement qui sont adaptées à un duo maman-enfant quand l'enfant a même plus de 18 ans. 25% des enfants qu'on a reçus ont eu moins de 2 ans. 25% ont eu 12 ans et plus et l'âge médian a été 5 ans. Et avec ces statistiques-là, vous pouvez imaginer les défis d'être toujours en train d'adapter les services parce qu'à un moment, on peut avoir une cohorte que des bébés et des enfants d'âge préscolaire. À un autre moment, on parle plus d'adolescents et les besoins des deux groupes ne sont pas pareils. Quand les femmes viennent à LGH5, on leur demande c'est quoi votre première raison, votre raison principale pour venir dans la maison d'hébergement. Donc ici, c'est les raisons nommées par les femmes. Il y a 34% des femmes qui disent être dans une situation d'itinérance. En réalité, on sait que toutes les femmes vivent l'itinérance, mais elles ne veulent pas s'identifier comme étant dans une situation d'itinérance. Donc, on le voit seulement dans un tiers des cas. Après, la violence conjugale, c'est très présent. Il y a 22% des femmes qui disent être là en conséquence de la violence conjugale, en conséquence directe. Après, on a les difficultés financières, 15%, les problématiques reliées à l'immigration, 13%, l'éviction, 10%, la santé mentale, 3%, c'est très petit, mais en réalité, on voit qu'il y a beaucoup plus de femmes qui vivent avec des problèmes de santé mentale, mais qui ne les reconnaissent pas ou qui ne veulent pas les nommer. Et on a eu 3% des femmes qui ont été là en raison d'une ordonnance de la Chambre de la jeunesse. Où est-ce que les femmes étaient avant d'être à LGH5? On a beaucoup d'itinérance cachée parmi cette population-là. Donc, 38% des femmes étaient avec la famille ou avec des amis en couchsurfing. Et là, ça peut varier en degré de précarité. Donc, il y a souvent des contextes qui sont quand même très précaires où la famille n'est pas du tout logée adéquatement. Il y a 38% des femmes qui venaient d'une autre ressource temporaire, donc par exemple une maison d'hébergement violence conjugale, une autre maison d'hébergement en itinérance, mais à la fin de leur séjour, elles n'avaient toujours pas trouvé un logement. 15% qui viennent d'un appartement privé, 7% qui viennent d'un logement transitionnel de notre organisme et 1% qui étaient en maison de chambre avec leurs enfants. À LOGIFAM, à la Lumineuse, depuis 2021, on a reçu 10 femmes qui étaient enceintes lors de leur séjour et on a eu 8 naissances à la Lumineuse. Donc, vous pouvez aussi imaginer les ajustements qui doivent être faits pour accommoder les nouveau-nés dans une maison d'hébergement. Il y a beaucoup de problématiques, beaucoup de profils. Chaque femme est unique, mais il y a quand même certaines problématiques qui reviennent. Donc, la violence conjugale, c'est majeur. Donc, il y a certaines femmes qui viennent d'avoir vécu un épisode de violence conjugale, mais il y a beaucoup de femmes qui l'ont vécu dans le passé et qui n'ont pas réussi à rétablir leur vie à 100%. Donc, il y a 77% des femmes qui ont vécu la violence conjugale à un moment dans leur vie. Et parmi elles, 95% vivent encore la violence post-séparation. Il y a 34% des femmes qui sont issues de l'immigration avec une immigration datant de moins de 10 ans. Et parmi ces femmes-là, il y a 72% des femmes qui ont un statut précaire. Donc, ça aussi, ça présente des défis parce qu'elles ont moins accès aux services et aux programmes de logement disponibles. Il y a 41% des femmes qui sont suivies par la protection de la jeunesse. Donc, en tant que ressource, on doit naviguer comment travailler en collaboration avec le département de la protection de la jeunesse en même temps en ayant nos propres mandats respectifs. Il y a 30% des femmes qui ont été évincées dans le logement. Et l'isolement, c'est vraiment majeur. Il y a beaucoup de femmes qui n'ont pas vraiment de réseau social, qui ne sont pas reliées à d'autres organismes. Donc, l'isolement, c'est un enjeu majeur. À LOGIFAM, notre objectif, c'est que les femmes partent vers un logement. Donc, dès l'arrivée de la femme, c'est le premier dossier qu'on travaille. Où est-ce qu'elle va aller après LOGIFAM? Donc, il y a 75% des femmes qui sont venues à la Lumineuse qui sont parties vers un logement, 47% vers un logement permanent et 26% vers un logement transitionnel. Après, malgré nos efforts, il y a des femmes qui quittent sans avoir fini leur séjour parce qu'elles avaient du mal à s'adapter à être dans une maison d'hébergement, parce qu'elles voulaient aller ailleurs. Donc, il y a 14% des femmes qui quittent sans nous dire où elles vont. Et 11% qui vont dans une autre ressource temporaire. Et maintenant, je vais passer la parole à Jessica.
Donc, on voulait vous amener à l'intérieur, en fait, de la Lumineuse. Donc, concrètement, qu'est-ce qui se passe dans cette période charnière entre la crise et la stabilité? Donc, en réponse aux réalités entourant la maternité en contexte d'itinérance, on a adapté nos approches pour pouvoir soutenir les mères vers une stabilité qui était vraiment durable pour elles et leurs enfants. Donc, à LOGIFAM, on parle du principe que chaque femme arrive avec son sac à outils qui est déjà bien rempli. Par contre, il y en a parfois qui sont plus adaptés à leur situation ou qui sont abîmés. Donc, notre rôle à nous, c'est de les aider à retrouver ceux qui fonctionnent pour elles puis en découvrir de nouveaux. Donc, je parle dans le micro. Au-delà des suivis individuels, notre force, elle réside vraiment dans le milieu de vie. Donc, la maison, ça devient un lieu pour se déposer, retrouver son rythme et se redéfinir comme mère, comme femme, mais aussi comme citoyenne à part entière. La routine y joue un rôle fondamental. Pour les enfants, elle apporte la prévisibilité et la sécurité, alors que pour les mères, c'est parfois la première fois depuis un long moment où les journées reprennent du sens. C'est petit à petit que cette routine-là, elle leur permet de sortir du mode de survie. Donc, on offre aussi des ateliers qui abordent des compétences essentielles, telles que le budget et l'estime de soi, mais c'est surtout des moments d'apprentissage collectif, sans jugement, où est-ce que les femmes apprennent les unes des autres. Et parce que les enfants sont toujours là. Donc, on adapte nos activités pour qu'ils soient soit inclus, soit qu'ils aient leur propre petit moment de leur côté pour apprendre ou pour jouer. Juste être des enfants, en fait, pendant que leurs mamans peuvent avoir un moment entre femmes. Donc, on utilise aussi beaucoup les tâches domestiques, les tâches du quotidien, en fait, comme l'entretien des espaces communs. Ça devient vraiment plus que juste des tâches. C'est vraiment un outil d'apprentissage pour certaines femmes qui, parfois, n'avaient pas vraiment appris comment le faire, qui voyaient ça comme un fardeau. Donc, ça nous permet à nous d'évaluer leurs capacités. Puis, quand il y a un besoin, dans le fond, on leur propose des techniques qui sont plus adaptées à leur façon à elles pour faire en sorte que ça soit simple, plus facile, plus facile d'intégrer dans leur quotidien, dans leur routine, puis pouvoir amener ça dans leur futur logement. Mais parmi ces tâches, en fait, une de celles qui est particulièrement significative selon nous, c'est la tâche du souper de la maison. Donc, une fois par mois, chaque maman a la responsabilité de faire le souper pour la maison complète, une fois par mois. C'est une tâche qui est vraiment intimidante pour certaines, mais ça devient vraiment un moment de fierté pour la majorité d'entre elles. Parce qu'on va se le dire, après avoir fait à manger pour 7 familles, il n'y aura pas grand-chose qui va vous faire peur en cuisine. Donc, à partir d'une recette qui a été choisie par la femme elle-même, on va travailler ensemble avec notre cuisinière la sécurité alimentaire. Donc, comment est-ce qu'on cuisine avec qu'est-ce qu'on reçoit en banque alimentaire? Comment est-ce qu'on peut changer un ingrédient qu'on n'a pas sous la main pour quelque chose qu'on a dans le frigo, dans nos armoires? Et comment est-ce qu'on compose un repas simple, équilibré et peu coûteux? Donc, ça me fait penser à une famille. En fait, concrètement, on avait accueilli une famille, ça faisait quand même un bon moment qu'elle vivait une période d'instabilité résidentielle. Ses enfants et elle, ça faisait vraiment... ça faisait des années qu'ils n'étaient pas assis ensemble à la table pour partager un repas. Maman, elle n'avait pas vraiment appris à cuisiner dans sa vie, donc elle voyait vraiment cette tâche-là comme un fardeau. Nourrir les enfants, on mangeait sur le pouce, ça l'affectait énormément le budget, parce que quand on mange à l'extérieur, ça coûte cher. Donc, puis c'est ça. Donc, à la WGH5, j'essaie de sortir de mes petites cartes, je m'excuse. À la WGH5, en fait, c'est ça, avec cette routine-là, elle a appris à faire des recettes qui étaient simples, rapides, mais elle a surtout elle a repris le sens d'un repas partagé. Donc, s'asseoir avec ses enfants, parler de leur journée, puis créer un lien ensemble. Parce que bien manger, c'est pas juste remplir un frigo. C'est aussi transmettre des savoir-faire, redonner confiance et renforcer les liens familiaux. Puis quand on sait que c'est 41% des familles monoparentales dirigées par une femme qui vivent en insécurité alimentaire, on comprend à quel point c'est un apprentissage qui est essentiel pour une stabilité durable. Donc, en plus de la routine, en fait, le milieu de vie, ça nous permet la proximité des interventions. Et ça nous permet, en fait, de devenir un village temporaire pour ces familles-là. Temporaire, c'est vraiment le temps qu'elles puissent se recréer, ce village-là, à l'extérieur du refuge. Donc, pendant leur séjour, elles vont retrouver dans notre équipe du soutien, du modeling parental et des moments de répit. On y voit aussi beaucoup d'entraide entre les mamans. On leur redonne ainsi non seulement un toit, mais aussi un sentiment de compétence et de pouvoir d'agir. C'est surtout, ça leur permet de réaliser qu'elles ne sont pas seules puis qu'elles ont le droit de demander de l'aide. Donc, tout ce qu'on vient de voir, en fait, la routine, les tâches partagées puis l'entraide, ça peut sembler quand même vraiment banal. Mais pourtant, pour nous, c'est précisément ces gestes du quotidien qui constituent des leviers puissants de reconstruction. Okay. Parce que selon nous, offrir une véritable chance de se reconstruire, ça passe par une posture flexible, attentive et adaptée au parcours de la personne. À la WGH5, on a la chance de travailler avec une ergothérapeute dans notre équipe. C'est une véritable richesse parce qu'à travers des évaluations et des recommandations, elle nous permet de mettre en lumière certaines difficultés, certaines barrières auxquelles nos résidentes font face. Je repense à Gina. En fait, c'est une maman qu'on a accueillie à la Lumineuse après des expulsions de d'autres maisons d'hébergement. Elle est arrivée avec son petit bébé. Mais cette fois-ci, l'enjeu il était vraiment grand. Parce que si elle se faisait encore expulser de la maison d'hébergement, en fait, elle perdait la garde de son bébé. Dès qu'elle est arrivée à la WGH5, elle présentait des comportements qui avaient été identifiés par d'autres comme de la mauvaise volonté. d'impulsivité, des oublis constants, de la difficulté à suivre le cadre. Une évaluation avec notre ergothérapeute a révélé des séquelles cognitives liées à plus de 7 traumatismes crâniens qu'elle avait vécus. Donc, en comprenant ça, on a pu adapter nos approches et on a partagé nos constats avec les autres organismes qui étaient impliqués auprès de la famille. Ça a vraiment tout changé pour cette famille-là, en fait, parce que Gina, elle a pu conserver la garde de son bébé. Elle a pu obtenir un appartement à loyer modique, donc un HLM, et elle y vit maintenant de façon autonome. Puis quand on sait que c'est plus de la moitié des personnes en situation d'itinérance qui auraient vécu au moins un traumatisme crânien, c'est clairement pas un cas qui est isolé. Bien entendu, la vie en communauté, ça apporte son lot de défis. La cohabitation, par exemple, qui engendre des tensions parfois, et la gestion de conflits devient une compétence vraiment essentielle pour notre équipe. À cela s'ajoutent des limites institutionnelles et organisationnelles qui restreignent parfois, pour ne pas dire souvent, nos marges de manœuvre. On observe aussi également une présence croissante des femmes ayant un statut précaire, comme Sally nous l'a mentionné. Ça ajoute des barrières supplémentaires à nos interventions avec les barrières de langue puis les limitations d'accès aux services ou toute aide financière. Et un des enjeux majeurs, ça réside dans la santé mentale des mères. Donc, à la Lumineuse en particulier, c'était 51% de nos mamans qu'on a hébergées qui vivaient avec des enjeux de santé mentale qui avaient des répercussions sur leur quotidien. Donc, on parle d'anxiété, troubles de l'humeur, choc post-traumatique. Donc, notamment, on a aussi été témoins de quatre mamans dans la maison d'hébergement depuis l'ouverture seulement en 2021, en fait, en décembre 2021, de 4 épisodes psychotiques dans notre maison d'hébergement. Ces situations, bien que prises en charge avec rigueur et compassion, ça soulève des préoccupations importantes quant au sentiment de sécurité des enfants et des autres familles dans la maison. Mais ça met aussi en lumière les limites d'un système où l'accès aux services spécialisés en santé mentale est encore beaucoup trop difficile. Donc, un autre enjeu qu'on a remarqué, c'est aussi la hausse des demandes d'hébergement pour des mamans qui ont des enfants avec un DITSA, donc une déficience intellectuelle ou un trouble du spectre de l'autisme. C'est une réalité qui semble par ailleurs être un facteur aggravant pour ces mères qui sont souvent très isolées et ancrées dans une routine qui est très stricte et épuisées par leur rôle de proche aidant. Ça serait vraiment un sujet pour une autre conférence, en fait. Ces familles rencontrent des défis particuliers dans leur intégration à nos services, notamment en raison d'un environnement communautaire souvent surstimulant. On peut quand même on accueille juste 7 familles, mais on peut quand même avoir jusqu'à 13 enfants dans la maison. Donc, ça peut être assez intense par moment. En plus, le changement de quartier, même si c'est temporaire, ça entraîne souvent, et presque toujours, en fait, la perte ou la pause des services qui sont sectorisés. Donc, cette réalité nous a amené à faire diverses adaptations, comme Sally nous l'a expliqué plus tôt, par exemple, en acceptant des enfants majeurs. Mais parmi les défis qui avaient été anticipés, l'accueil des ados s'est révélé être une véritable richesse. Donc, leur présence, ça a transformé les dynamiques, favorisé la reconstruction du lien familial et ça permet des interventions précoces. Donc, dès l'ouverture de notre deuxième maison en 2021, en fait, c'était super important pour nous de pouvoir accueillir les enfants de 0 à 17 ans. Donc, de ne pas en laisser de côté. C'est une pratique qui est encore rare à Montréal puisqu'on serait la seule ressource en itinérance à le faire. Donc, concrètement, en fait, j'ai la petite histoire de Ginette. C'est tous des noms fictifs, hein? De Ginette et son fils de 16 ans. Ça faisait plus d'une année, en fait, qu'il vivait en couchsurfing. Donc, chez un ami, un autre et tout. Il n'y avait aucun professeur, aucun ami qui était au courant de la situation de la famille. Donc, il cachait la situation par peur d'être signalé à la protection de la jeunesse puis de se voir placé. À leur arrivée, en fait, le jeune homme s'isolait dans sa chambre, donc sa chambre à lui, parce qu'on a des chambres spécifiques pour eux. Il était vraiment convaincu, en fait, que sa seule présence masculine, ça risquait de faire perdre sa place à sa mère. Donc, grâce à des rencontres spécifiques pour les ados, notre intervenante de soir qui est dédiée pour eux aussi, et des activités adaptées, il a pu reprendre confiance puis peu à peu prendre sa place. Donc, depuis 4 ans maintenant, on a accueilli plus de 18 ados, sans incident majeur. Ça reste quand même des ados, avec tous les hauts et les bas émotionnels que ça peut impliquer, là. Mais accueillir les ados, c'est pas quelque chose, c'est pas un risque. C'est vraiment une richesse pour la maison. Donc, j'ai presque fini. En plus du soutien à l'intérieur du refuge, on mise grandement sur l'importance de la communauté pour assurer un filet social puis assurer la réaffiliation sociale. Donc, notre objectif, c'est vraiment que chaque famille sache vers qui se tourner ou comment chercher de l'aide lorsqu'elle aura quitté nos services. Pour ce faire, en fait, on va orienter les familles vers des organismes qui vont pouvoir favoriser le développement d'une nouvelle communauté. Par exemple, il y a certains organismes familles qui regroupent sous un même toit une garderie, des ateliers de développement de l'enfant, des cafés-rencontres pour les mamans et même une banque alimentaire ou des friperies. Donc, ça permet aux familles de pouvoir tisser des nouveaux liens tout en accédant à des services qui sont vraiment essentiels. Et pour assurer tous ces acquis-là, en fait, une fois qu'elles ont quitté notre maison d'hébergement, on a un soutien post-hébergement, donc un continuum de services qui permet 18 mois de soutien une fois qu'elle va être dans son nouvel appartement pour lui permettre de s'ancrer dans sa nouvelle vie. Je repasse là.
Donc, juste pour finir, parce que j'ai eu le mention qu'il ne nous reste pas beaucoup de temps, pour résumer, notre plaidoyer, c'est vraiment qu'on reconnaisse la réalité des mères en situation d'itinérance, que c'est une réalité qui est présente et qui est distincte et qu'il faut des services en conséquence. Et oui, il faut des logements, c'est primordial, mais il faut qu'il y ait aussi des places en urgence pour accueillir les femmes avec enfants dans une situation de crise. Donc, merci beaucoup pour votre écoute et au plaisir d'échanger à la fin.
Thank you, Sally and Jessica. Thank you so much. And so I'm Bridget Anor, a graduate student from Western University. And this afternoon, I'm presenting on my graduate research, which is focused on the lived experiences of street-living adolescent girls and intersectional feminist inquiry. And for this work, I'm supported by my PhD supervisor, Abe Uchon, and my committee members, Dr. Erin Dirge from Wilfrid Laurier University, Dr. Gordon Aku from Western University, and Dr. Godfrey Boateng from York University. And so I know we've been hearing lots of stories about homelessness in Canada, and I'm going to take us to a different context. The main idea is to help us think broadly that homelessness is also present in different contexts, and then we should come together on how to and think about how we can globally end this challenge of homelessness. And so youth homelessness takes many forms around the world, and the struggles such as finding safety, belonging, and opportunities are shared. Though this study is far away from Canada, I believe that the insights from this study matter as well, as Canada has welcomed several migrants, and including many from West Africa. And so understanding how young people navigate marginalization and exclusion can help us think differently about the support, belonging, and inclusion. And so my study is focused in Ghana. Ghana is a small country located in West Africa. And this study is specifically on street adolescent girls. You realize that I'm not using the term homelessness, but I'm using the term streetism or street living because of the cultural components that come with the term homelessness. I believe that in Canada, we are mostly used to the term homelessness, but from my study and from other cultural contexts, it is believed that the term homelessness is not acceptable culturally because in the Ghanaian context, everybody has a home. But then there are different factors that is causing people to live on the street. And so from the findings of my study, I realized that the term homelessness sits uneasily in the Ghanaian cultural context. And so for this study, I'll be using the term streetism or street living, which can be equated to the term youth homelessness in the Canadian context. And so in Ghana, migration from rural areas to urban centers in search of greener pastures is a major cause of streetism or homelessness. And poverty is also a major cause of this issue. And for my study, the experience of streetism in Ghana is mostly associated with delinquency, substance use, crime, and other social vices. And I believe this is not so much different from what we know from the Canadian context. It is reported about 61,492 children are living on the street in only one region of Ghana. And for some context, Ghana is a very small country with a total population of about 30 million people. And we have only about 61,492 children, street-living children, living in just a region of Ghana. We have 10 regions in Ghana. And so this should tell you about the severity of the issue in the Ghanaian context. And this number continued to grow as it was reported about 90,000 children were living on the street as of 2016. Unfortunately, the issue of streetism hasn't been given much attention in the Ghanaian context, and so there's not much statistics out there to support recent studies. Yet, only few studies have examined this phenomenon of street living among adolescent girls in Ghana. What I realized from the literature is most studies focused on homeless youth, and so they categorize all homeless youth, not paying much attention to gender. And so I decided to look at how gender influences the experiences of these young people who are living their lives on the street. And so this only few studies have paid attention or have looked at the gender-based analysis of homelessness in the Ghanaian context. So the study of streetism among adolescent girls is important as it exposes them to several health and social challenges. I believe the literature in Canada has also detailed the several challenges that youth experiencing homelessness are facing in this Canadian context. In addition, street-living girls are particularly vulnerable as some of these challenges are gendered, largely due to the patriarchal nature of the Ghanaian society. I believe there's much talks about gender equality. There's much talks about how we can empower women and young women, but unfortunately, in some contexts, like the Ghanaian context, in some low to middle income country, patriarchy is still very prevalent, and it is one issue that is undermining or that is causing streetism among the youth. And so the purpose of my study is to uncover the lived experiences of street adolescent girls in Accra, Ghana. And I employed a phenomenological approach with a feminist intersectional lens to explore this lived experience and to look at how overlapping factors such as gender, culture, and socioeconomic status shape their lived experiences. And so this, just to make sure, this is just a piece of my study. My research is actually a mixed method study, and so I'm including the qualitative component as well as a quantitative component, and I'm presenting the qualitative component. The quantitative component, I surveyed about 400 street-living adolescent girls, which will also look at factors such as factors that promote their resilience, factors that contribute to their health-promoting behaviors while living on the street. And so for this presentation today, I'm focusing on the qualitative piece, which looks at their unique lived experiences. And so for this study, I sampled about 20 street-living adolescent girls. And to note, during the time of data collection, obviously, COVID was still around, and as a graduate student, traveling became a challenge. And so I had to employ several research assistants to help with this study. And so from the findings of this study, the first one is a push-pull dynamics, which details poverty, neglect, and living in integrated families, and maltreatment and abuse. And I believe this is not so different from the Canadian context. When we look from the literature, many of the young people spoke to how after they became homeless due to poverty or due to broken homes or due to abuse. And I believe that while the economic and social conditions may differ here in Canada, the study of the story of youth living in unsafe homes in search of survival and dignity is not very unfamiliar. We've seen several studies detailing how poverty, how abuse and maltreatment is also contributing towards homelessness in the Canadian context. And the second finding from this study is treat girls' labor as a form of support for family. This was very intriguing as from the literature and looking at other studies that has been done. It looks at in the Ghanaian context, most of these street girls find themselves on the street as a means to support their families. And so their families are living in the rural areas, but they are on the street in the urban areas, working to support their families and to even support their male siblings who are, due to the patriarchal nature, they are home living with their families. But these young girls find themselves on the street working to support their families at home. And this details the gender inequality that we have been fighting, we have been speaking about. And so young women face inequality, being burdened with the caregiving role. And this differ here in Canada, but the broader lesson holds that gender continues to shape vulnerability and opportunities for young women and for the youth. And other finding is social labeling and harassment. It was noted from this study that street-living adolescent girls experience abuse and maltreatment on the street. It is sad that already they are experiencing this social inequality, and then they are living on the street trying to make ends meet, but then they are also experiencing further abuse and maltreatment on the street. And many participants also described facing abuse and exploitation from strangers, a daily threat that eroded their sense of safety. Though the sources of risk might look different here, the emotional impact is universal. It speaks to how society treats our marginalized population. It speaks to how society look down on our marginalized population. And so for this study, the implications are that the drivers of streetism, such as abuse and maltreatment, should be addressed. I believe that Canada being a much advanced country, I know we have taken we've made more policies to tackle this, but in the Ghanaian context, there need to be more drivers to address maltreatment. And there should be a creation of state-funded support programs for low-income families and more awareness of this critical social issue. And I believe that the whole essence of this conference is to create more awareness on this issue. And I believe that the findings from this study, it speaks to the inequalities that is being faced by young women. While the dynamics are different here in Canada, the broader issue is familiar. Gender and social perception influence who gets help and who remains invisible. The findings invite us to think about how similar patterns might occur here or appear here in Canada. This resonates with ongoing discussions in Canada about inclusion, safety, and youth well-being. And so the findings of the study reveal that street-living adolescent girls experience unique challenges, and these are influenced by intersecting factors such as gender, socioeconomic status, and culture. And so seeing it globally, it helps us to to learn from each other's context and build solutions that are inclusive and just. And this afternoon, I want you to think, as we've gathered to think more about how to find solutions to the Canadian context, I invite us to also think broadly that this issue is also very pervasive globally. It is also happening in other contexts. And so as we come together to build solutions, to build policies to help the Canadian context, I invite us to also cast our net wide and think globally about the issue of homelessness in other contexts. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Bridget. Thanks, Jessica Sally, for this presentation. My name is Toyin Ajibade. And this afternoon, maybe the first thing I have to do is to bring us back from Ghana. I'm bringing us back to Edmonton this afternoon. So this is part of my graduate research. And unlike what everyone has, I've not come with answers this afternoon. I've come with a lot more questions, rather, because this is like a work in progress. And at the end of the day, what I want to achieve is to leave this place, thinking better around this challenge than what I had in mind when I came here. So I'm looking at co-creating solutions at the intersection of eating homelessness and food insecurity among women, girls, and gender diverse immigrants in Edmonton. Like I said, it's part of my graduate research and my supervisors, Elizabeth Onyango and Mary Becky. So here is a brief outline of my presentation. Like I had already mentioned my goal. I want to leave this place with a better work than what I came with. I'm going to give a brief about my positionality around this research, do a brief introduction, provide some context around gender perspective to homelessness in Canada, understanding the food security situation of the homeless, statement of my problem, research objective, justification, provide theoretical framework, and then let you know what my methodology and methods are, and then get feedback. This is a work in progress. So as much as you can, please, I need you to think around what I'm presenting so that at the end of the day, you're going to be able to provide me with some feedback. Now to my positionality. This was a picture that I took on the streets of New York. I think this was a day before I came into Canada. And, I was so excited. I was doing some shopping because I was coming to Canada, and I had no idea what I was coming to. So I have a bit of experience, lived experience around homelessness, but it's not like the conventional or the traditional homelessness, but hidden homelessness. And then here is a picture of the first shopping that I did when I got to Canada. And then part of what informed what I shopped for, so these are basically cereals and stuff like that. Part of what informed what I shopped that day was the lady I was renting from. I was renting like 2 rooms in a home. I was with my son. And then one of the things she told me, she had this long list of rules and regulations around living in a house. And one of them was that, no cooking cultural food in this house. There were a lot of rules. And this was, I am unable to share all of my experience, living in that house, which was the first place that I lived in when I got to Canada. But some of my experiences are just, centered around discrimination, people just looking at the color of your skin and making assumptions about the kind of person you are. And then, I would tell a brief story, like a really short story. There was a day this lady met me, going to the store to shop. And then she just called me, "Oh, Tony, you're going shopping?" I said, "Yes." "Okay, well, do you want to take a seat?" So I sat. And she said, "Well, I understand that as an immigrant, there's a lot of struggles, but no matter what you're going through, try not to shoplift." Yeah. Try not to shoplift. So I was looking at where is this advice coming from? I couldn't wrap my head around it. And then she went on to tell me a story that, when she was much younger, she had actually shoplifted with a friend, but the police didn't do anything because at the end of the day, she's white. And then they just warned her and let her go. That was one of the experiences. Another one was when I bought my first car. And then she looked at the car and said, "Oh, you bought your first car, can I see the trunk?" And then she looked in the boot of my car and said, "Oh, it's spacious. It's good that you got a car like this so that when you become homeless, you have a place to keep your stuff." Because there are a lot of homeless people in Canada and there are a lot of immigrants. That was what she said. I could go on and on and on. And at a point, I took the decision, that I wasn't going to take it any longer. I had to leave. And that was the point that I became eating homeless. I was couch surfing with my son, with one of the people that we were attending church together. And that is part of my positionality. And this is my son, who is now in his 3rd year, studying computing science and maths. And, while we were in that house, that was the corner where he could read, because the woman lived in the basement, and then if he needed to use the restroom at night, if he was going to, if he was reading and needed to use the washroom, he just couldn't go to the washroom because the lady was going to complain that the floor is making creaking sound. Like, how do you walk on a wooden floor and it doesn't make sound? So that is about my positionality. And that was what informed me. So even though I had the opportunity, where I was couch surfing, it was a lot better than what I was experiencing. But I knew that there were things I was dealing with, around food insecurity. And that is even for me, someone who has a place to put their head. There are a lot of people who were not as lucky as I am. And that is part of what informed this research. And now, as a brief introduction, homelessness in Edmonton, it's a chronic public health problem. It's persistent and it's rising. And there is not much work. There's a lot of work going on around homelessness, but there's not much going on around invisible homelessness, which is the hidden homeless. Like a lot of people would see me at that time. I was driving a car. I would still show up, in my workplace and stuff, but you wouldn't be able to tell that I'm going through something. So that's the invisibility, nature that surrounds hidden homelessness, which makes it, really difficult to tackle. And then most of, the work that have been done are around the conventional homelessness. And then we don't have much data, surrounding invisible homelessness. But what we have, however, is that for every one person that you see on the streets in Edmonton, there are 3 people who are hidden homeless. Probably couch surfing, living in precarious housing situation, living in their vehicles, and stuff like that. So that's about it around hidden homelessness and homelessness. And then for some reasons, obvious reasons, women, girls, and gender diverse people are, at greater risk because of, the issues or the challenges that they have to deal with, intersectional issues. And then most of the time, policies and services tend to miss the invisible homeless, right? If I'm homeless, I can walk into a shelter, like I can find solace there. People can help me, support me. If I have a home, but I'm, food insecure, I could approach the food bank, get some food and stuff like that. But when I'm hidden homeless, right, I'm not there, but I'm not here. I'm just somewhere in between. And what this means is that I may not have access to cooking facilities, to be able to make the kind of food that are culturally appropriate to me. And so for reasons like that, I don't have a permanent address. When I get to food bank, they're probably going to ask for means of ID or my, address or whatever it is, which I do not have. And what this means is that policies and services tend to miss these people. Invisible homeless people are in the blind spot of policies. Now, throwing a gender perspective to homelessness in Canada, there's so much work that have been done that we can see. And everything just comes to the fact that women are at greater risk, right? A lot of women probably trying to flee from gender-based violence, domestic violence, people trying to support their children, maybe death of spousal death. For various reasons, women are just, more affected. And we have a lot of data surrounding that. A lot of work has been done in that aspect. And if we are still asking the question, why are women so much affected? It's because of the peculiarity of their situation. Women, girls, gender diverse people, intersectional issues, things they're dealing with, things that people have to face every single day based on who they are. Now, I want us to just understand, just give a bit of background into understanding food security situation of the homeless. There's so much evidence, on how there are numerous barriers that jeopardize food security among the homeless people. I've mentioned some of them, like not having a permanent housing, not having access to cooking facilities, and so on and so forth. Now, the severe food insecurity in Alberta doubled since 2011, and now it impacts about 8.7%. That was the data we have as of 2024. And there's rising costs everywhere across Canada. Inadequate support and discriminations, are some of the factors that are driving this crisis that we're talking about. And currently, 1 in 5 Edmontonians are affected by food insecurity. And Edmonton particularly, is just notorious for this challenge. And it ranks highest among Canadian cities where people are affected by food insecurity. And when we talk food insecurity, we are talking about people not having, issues with access, with, availability, affordability, not being able to access what they need, to live the quality of life that they would have loved to live. And then to a large extent, immigrants in Edmonton are more affected. They are at greater risk. And there are some recent research that shows that there's as much as 75%, prevalence of food insecurity among immigrant communities, ethnocultural communities in Edmonton. And then these eating homeless are most vulnerable to food insecurity because, they just tend to fall through the cracks. I've already established how, people who have a roof, people who are housed have access, people who don't have access, but people who are eating homeless, they tend to fall through the cracks of, support system that we have. So I have 4 objectives that I want to achieve at the end of this research. And the first one will be that I want to examine, the manifestation of food insecurity experiences among eating homeless women, girls, and gender diverse persons. And then the second one will be to identify the key barriers to food security faced by these people that are experiencing eating homelessness and to illuminate the coping strategies that they have employed, over time in response to their food insecurity situation. The third one will be to explore the interconnections between eating homelessness and food insecurity and the lived experiences of persons affected by these overlapping issues. And then the last one will be that I want to identify community-driven recommendations for interventions that can effectively address food insecurity within this community. I've talked extensively about why this work is important, but I will just mention again that this is important because of the deepening precarity of food insecurity, especially for these vulnerable communities. The inability of existing support frameworks in catering to this community calls for targeted approaches, which is what I'm trying to achieve with this work. And then there's need to center the voices of people that are experiencing this because, it's so unrealistic for us to say that we're going to provide solutions when we don't even understand what people are experiencing. So it's important to center the voices of people who are experiencing hidden homelessness, in coming about solutions to what we feel the problems are or what they tell us that the problems are really. And then, there are no known studies that have specifically addressed food insecurity among eating homeless people in Canada, specifically for women, girls, and gender diverse people. And then this work would also be contributing to evidence generation, for policy development and a process of improvement for community partners working in the homelessness space. So I intend to look at this work, basically through the critical feminist narrative inquiry, where I'm going to be centering the stories and lived experiences of people. I'm also going to be looking, integrating intersectionality because we know that, the people that I'm trying to look at, they are at the intersection of so many things. Some are migrants, probably beyond even the immigration status, differs, and it speaks to the kind of experiences that people can have, the gender, culture, a lot of things. So I'm going to be integrating intersectionality into that framework. And then my approach is to do this, as a community-based participatory research. And I've, already identified some of the community partners that I'm intending to work with. So the work is going to be set in Edmonton. The community partner that I've, identified right now, who I have sort of started working with, is Rema Chapel, because they tend to, attend to some of this population. So in terms of recruiting participants, it's a bit tricky because, like we said, it's eating. These are not people who are in plain sight. So it has to be probably what is established in literature that is going to work has to do with snowballing, where people who, people can refer us to people who are similar to them, who might be going through the same experiences that they have. So based on the kind of population that I have, I'm not expecting that I'm able to find, a really large sample size. And as a matter of fact, I don't need a large sample size for this kind of research. I just need to, be able to, I'm looking at depth, not with, so to speak. So I'm looking at people who can really engage at the level of depth that will give us, really good understanding, make us grounded in what's happening in this space. So in terms of, how do I generate data for this work? In-depth interviews, photo voice, so that people can show us, let us see what is this experience like. And then, of course, document analysis, because I know from my own experience that things like, things like journal, when I was going through what I was going through, I had journals that I kept, things that I kept in my diaries, stories that I wrote, all sort of, documentation that people do. So I'm trying to look at how, document analysis would work within that space. And then in terms of the data analysis, I'm going to be following the narrative inquiry, and it's just outlined like this. Basically, what I'm trying to do is, collect these stories, understand people's stories, then restory it such that at the end of the day, I'm able to tell the story, collectively, to be able to explain or to ground the work in what the experiences are, and then navigate a way forward from there in terms of, developing themes and then coming up with results that can be shared. These are the ethical considerations that I have. Informed consent, because I understand, how not a lot of people would want to share their stories, because sometimes their family members may not even know what they're going through, what the experience is. Their colleagues may not know. So it's a bit, challenging to work within that space. So that is what informed the ethical considerations that I have. Things like respect, cultural humility, confidentiality, dignity, justice. Going to be adopting trauma-informed, practices, and then, of course, we're looking at being able to compensate participants for the time, because I understand that, engaging people in in-depth interviews is taking up their time. So just to be able to get people, to be part of what we're doing. And then thinking around how I intend to mobilize knowledge that I get from this, because I know that this is going to be contributing a lot to what is not known yet within the space. So I'm looking at, at the end of the day, probably creating a microsite where I can host the research from this study. Co-creating concise policy briefs that center the voices of people, which can be shared, with appropriate agencies, and then, publications in open access journals, capacity building to equip frontliners with strategies for identifying and responding to food insecurity in dignified ways, because that's one thing that is very crucial, when we're working with people who are eating homeless. They probably do not want you to understand or know what they're going through. So it's important for us to be able to build capacity to even recognize before this becomes even, blows out of proportion, becomes bigger issues for people. Also looking to, co-designing accessible materials in form of infographics, short videos on, trying to just map out the ecosystem for help that is available, because a lot of times it's not as if there are no support or help in place, but people simply don't know how to navigate those spaces. So looking at being able to design something that would map out the ecosystem of help that is available, that people can go to get support, and then probably looking at developing and disseminating plain language reports to community partners that I'll be working with. And also, I hope that at the end of this research, I would probably be able to establish like a community of lived experience cycles where people can have a forum where people can get together, talk, learn from each other, just be able to provide the support that the other person needs, helping people to navigate the road that you have been on at some point. So at this point, I would say that research means that I don't know, and that's what I'm saying this afternoon, that I don't know, but I'm willing to find out. I know that this is a lot of work, and I'm going to be needing everybody's support. Ask me questions, open my eyes to what I'm not seeing, what am I missing out? Those are my questions. What more would you like to see me, come up with this research? And, basically just how do I make this work better? Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our presenters. Just another round of applause for everyone. These folks were also incredibly timely, considering they all had very fulsome presentations, but shared the space so well. We actually have quite a bit of time for feedback, for conversation, and for questions. So if folks want to raise their hand, if you have a question, I'll bring the microphone over to you.
Thank you so much. I should be walking. I have a question, but it's going to be in English. That's okay for you? Yeah. So my question is about the shelter for women. I'm actually from Waterloo region. We were just starting a transitional housing program for racialized women to provide culturally sensitive services. So you caught me on that part when you said that the shelter started for single women. But then you decided that, okay, of course, we're not going to turn out anyone, and that's like so amazing from you guys. But what was the actual reason that you had to divide the shelter to a separate shelter for women with children and a single woman? Was it only the capacity as a space, or there is other reasons and challenges? I'm trying just to see in the future, because our shelter is for both women with children and single women.
The original shelter actually does still have places for women with children. So having the additional shelter gave us more places for women with children. So we have one that's mixed and one that's not mixed. But even when we in the original shelter, we did notice that there is a cohabitation challenge between the women with and without children sometimes. So sometimes the women without children enjoy the presence of children and feel like it's beneficial and they're happy, and sometimes it's annoying. And so it's really, and for the women with children, sometimes there was a sense that they felt judged or they felt observed. So before we opened the shelter just for women, for many years we'd said it would be nice to be able to have something that was just the moms together. But in the other shelter, the cohabitation, what's cohabitation in English? The cohabitation, it still works. Like having the two groups together does still work. But there's the main issues is for some women without children, the usual activity of children. Not everyone likes that. So that's the change, but definitely it can totally work all together as well. There's another issue, I think, is one of the reasons is in terms of different profiles. So in terms of the mental health issue, we tend to find that the mental health issues for the women without children, it can become, there can be issues that are a lot more serious, but then we have also seen those same issues with women with children. So there's that too. It's like what's what's an appropriate environment for children? What kind of issues can we deal with in a resource that has children? But as we've gone on through this for many years, we've seen that maybe at one point we had an idea, well, the mental health problems can be worse for some of the single women, but actually some of the women with children also have serious mental health problems. So those are my comments. Tu veux ajouter quelque chose?
No, I think it's we did not really divide it. Like it just when we had the opportunity to open this other shelter, like the wait list for the women with children was way bigger, so the need was really out there. We also wanted to have a place where we could accommodate teenagers also, which was another things to add to it, which could also be men, little boys also. So yeah, but it's doing well. And yes, like Sally said, the other shelter is still having places for moms. That there's single women, there's also moms, and there's also places that are adapted for handicapped women also.
Hi there. My question is for the middle panelist. I'm so sorry, I'm forgetting your name, but it was a great presentation. My question is about your relationship with social service agencies in Ghana, or because I think your recommendations are really great. So I'm kind of wondering, like, who can you give those recommendations from the girls so that hopefully they can, make changes or try to implement some of these great ideas about cultural supports that you mentioned?
So thank you very much for this question. I think I didn't mention the ethics part for the study, but thankfully when I was doing the ethics, I was able to involve the Ministry of Children and Gender Affairs of Ghana. And so they are aware of this study. And so it was noted that the implications, whatever, the findings of this study will be communicated to the Ministry of Gender and Children's Affairs. And then it will be forwarded to the different ministries that are in charge, like the social work, the different NGOs that work with this population. And so the plan is the findings will be communicated to the Ministry of Gender and Children's Affairs so that policies can be put in place to help this population. And then I also have had the opportunity to work with other non-governmental agencies that help street girls. And so some of these findings will be communicated to them. And I'm in the process of helping them find funding to also help some of these girls. Unfortunately, there is nothing like shelter back in Ghana. It's a new concept. That is, so most of these girls still sleep on the streets in the evening. And so that is something that we have to escalate to the government to also help the street living adolescent girls. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to say, collectively, I really appreciate that all of you are increasing the visibility on these issues and just raising the volume on some of the silenced voices that we encounter in these spaces. My first question is for Toyin. And it's, you spoke about coping mechanisms of those who experience hidden homelessness. And like at this point in your research, are there any coping mechanisms that you can speak to that you've identified or that you hypothesized to this point? If you can share some of the coping mechanisms that you've identified thus far.
Thank you very much. Thinking on my feet, or I'll just say the straight answer to that question is no, I haven't identified any. But I can tell you the ones that are not coping strategies. Like, I don't know the ones that are coping strategies, but I know the ones that are not working at this point. Based on my own experience so far, not based on collective experience, but based on my own experience, I know what doesn't work, but I'm trying to figure out what works. I don't know yet.
Okay. And then another question for you is, I understand that you're focusing on Edmonton. At any point in your study, are you going to engage similar inquiries that pertain to other urban areas in the country, like Toronto?
Yes, thank you very much for that as well. Trying to get funding, for this. So I'm in the process of getting funding where I hope that if I am able to, if I'm successful with the funding, I'm able to scale the research.
Thank you. Thanks. Can I proceed with my third question? All right. And this question is for Bridget. And so as a fellow Ghanaian Canadian, I know the struggles in conducting research on the ground in the country. And I wanted to know how you navigated the absence of gender-based data in Ghana, because that is a serious issue that I also encountered in my research. And I just wanted to see how you navigated that struggle.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you bringing, because even for ethics, for the study was very challenging, because in beginning of the study, I initiated how homelessness is seen differently in the Ghanaian context than in the Canadian context. And so going through ethics even with Western University, I'm probably the only graduate student who had to go for interview for my ethics, meet the ethics committee one-on-one, and answer all the questions, because all my responses still, they couldn't understand it because it was in a different context. But yes, I really appreciate that. And from the Ghana Statistical Services, even statistics on the street girls is very is very low. That is why I made mention of why they don't pay attention to it. If you see, the last statistics was done in 2016. And there have been several census that has been done, but they don't even focus on the homeless population. And so my research is, the aim of the study is to let them know that this is a challenge, this is an issue. We should pay attention to it. When we are taking statistics, when we are taking data for this study, for other things, we should pay attention to the homeless population, because we see them, they are very rampant on our streets. Like, you see them everywhere selling, they are crossing the street, they are very rampant on our street, and so we should pay attention to it. And thankfully, I think there was one study that was done in 2014 that paid attention to the gender statistics, and it revealed that about 57% of the street living children are actually girls. And so that was something that intrigued me, and I decided to look at specifically street girls, because I know most of the studies have been street youth, and then we don't pay attention to the gender lens, but we know in Ghanaian communities or in most African communities, gender is a big issue. And so that is the reason for the study. And so it's not the end of the study. Hopefully, after my PhD, I hope to escalate things more. We need to pay attention to homelessness. I believe is a global challenge. And so just as I'm thankful that this conference gave me the opportunity to present something different from the Canadian context, I believe that from henceforth, we'll be able to pay more attention to what is happening in other contexts as well. Thank you.
Any other questions? And just a friendly reminder that all of these presentations will be available on the CH25 app if you go to this WGH5. Okay, well, miigwech, thank you, merci to all of our wonderful presenters and for all of you for making the time today. And we get to finish a little bit early, so thanks so much.